You're listening to the Pulled by the Root podcast.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Hansen, and I'm sitting in with Elle Clausen. We have an incredible guest, CARLYN Montes de Oca. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here.
I'm so glad you're here. I can't wait to talk about your book and everything, but let me do the intro. CARLYN Montes de Oca is a multi-award-winning author, an international speaker, and passionate animal advocate. A former film editor on such movies as Honey, I Shrunk the Kids and Three Men and a Little Lady, CARLYN holds a bachelor's degree from Loyola Marymount University in communication arts and a master's degree in traditional Chinese medicine. As a sought-after speaker, CARLYN frequently talks on the powerful ways human health, happiness, and longevity are improved through our connection with our animal companions. She has been featured on ABC, CBS, NBC, and Women's Day magazine. A longtime resident of Northern California, CARLYN now lives in Santa Fe, New Mexico with her husband, Ken Fisher, an award-winning sound editor, and her beloved rescue dog, Grace. Her latest book, a #1 Amazon bestseller and award-winning book, Junkyard Girl, a memoir of ancestry, family secrets, and second chances, is available now. Welcome. Thank you. That's a lot.
Is it?
As someone who was mostly a stay-at-home mom, that's impressive. I make a pretty cupcake.
Well, that's something I can't do.
Anyway, I ordered your book because I really wanted to read it before we met, but it didn't come to me in time. But what I did was I listened to an episode of you being interviewed for your book because I wanted to know a little bit. And you are a late discovery adoptee. How old were you when that happened?
Well, it was only 4 years ago, and
Wow.
I was 57 at the time. So that's when it happened, very late in life, something completely unexpected.
Yeah. I would think, right, Amy?
I know when you submitted your submission to Pulled by the Root, I was just so fascinated when you said, would you like me to come on to share my secret? I am this family secret. So we would love for you to jump in anywhere you want and give us a little insight to this family secret.
Well, sure. Well, it all started on Facebook. No, it was just this typical winter day, and I was working on some material on the computer, and I got this message from Messenger, I think, on Facebook, and it was from some guy who had friended me about a week before, and I think he friended me because I liked animals, and so did he, and that's why I said yes. But then he said to me, "You look an awful lot like my wife." And I was like, whoa. And I thought, God, what a flirt. I'm going to go block him. But I didn't. I waited, and he kept sending me like, don't you think? And then he sent me a picture of his wife. And at that time, my husband had just walked in, and I said, Ken, do you think I look like this woman? And he's like, no. And so I'm a little sarcastic. So the guy kept asking me, don't you think? Don't you think? And so I just wrote him a little message, and it said, I think I don't. I just think that your wife and I shop for glasses at the same store. And he said, well, ancestry DNA says different. Wow. And I was like, whoa, What is this? And sure enough, yeah, I had taken an ancestry DNA test, and I'd gotten the results about a week ago. But at the time, I was so busy that I just really didn't pay attention. I was just like, okay, whatever. I didn't find anything extraordinary about myself. And all I had really done it for was to just figure out maybe if I was a mix of things from what part of the world. And so I said, who's your wife? And then he said her name. I'll call her, her name's Martha. And I remember that I had seen that name just very quickly on the ancestry DNA results. And if I had paid more attention at the time, it would have said, this is a potential half sibling. But I didn't at the time. And I didn't even after that. And this woman did reach out to me. I said it was fine. She was very polite. She was very thoughtful. She lived in Missouri, and she said, I don't want to bother you. I'm just looking for family. I've never seen such a close connection. And it ends up being that this woman, we didn't know at the time, but she ended up being my half sister. And so I just went and spoke with my siblings, who I didn't know were my adopted siblings, just to find out, hey, do you guys know, maybe we have an uncle who had a child out of wedlock, whatever. She's just looking for family. And everybody said, no, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what you're talking about. And at this point, my parents were deceased. So it was only my older siblings who were left. And 3 weeks passed, and my sister flew out from California, the sister I was raised with, who I believed was my only sister. And she said, something big has happened in our family, and I have to talk to you about it. And I was like, oh my God, what is it that she had to fly out here to tell me? And she sat down in our living room and burst out crying. And then she pulled out some pages out of her purse, and she said, I knew I was not going to be able to tell you. I knew it, and I had to write this about 12 times on the plane. And she proceeded to tell me that woman who had reached out to me was actually my sibling, a half sibling. And she said, you're adopted. That's the big secret. And that's where it all began, is just in the living room, hearing those words, CARLYN, you are adopted.
That blows my mind.
It blew my mind too.
No doubt. Because I know both Amy and I grew up knowing, right? And that caused its own issues. And we both have, different experiences from each other, and yet some similar feelings that came out of it. But I'm always fascinated by late discovery, because so often when I listen, it sounds like everybody knew. How is that secret kept? Nobody ever leaks a detail or something that makes you go, what? It just blows my mind.
Well, that was the question I said to my sister there were many questions. There were actually that day, I think I was in such shock, I didn't ask hardly anything. But the one thing I did say was, oh my God, our family is enormous. We have 63 first cousins. Right. How many people know? And she said, I have no idea. And so I proceeded to start, once a few things happened, and then I proceeded to start calling my cousins after that and say, I have news for you. I have something big to tell you. And they're like, what? And then I'd say, oh, I found out I was adopted. And they'd say, oh yeah, I knew that. Oh yeah, I knew that ever since I could what? Oh, right. Oh, you didn't know? And I stopped calling people because it was apparent everybody knew except for me. And I would say two things. One is if you don't expect it, there's been so many times in my life where something seems obvious, but because I didn't expect it to be so, I didn't give it any attention. So maybe there were little slips here and there. Maybe I don't know if I'm making up a memory or not, but one time I do believe one of my older brothers kidding around said something like, you're adopted. I kind of remember that, but he was always joking about everything. So sure. Of course I was like, yeah, whatever. And secondly, I'm not proud to admit it, but I'd make a terrible private detective. I obviously don't pick up obvious clues everywhere.
So what were some of those clues that you're talking about now? Like when you look back, what would you tell us?
Well, the obvious one is I don't look like anybody. I'm kind of a munchkin compared to the land of giants I grew up in. I'm 5'3". I have brothers who are 6'4", 6'3". My sister's taller than I am. Also, I don't look like anybody in the sense my father was very light skinned. He had green eyes. Two of my siblings look like that. The Montes de Ocas in general kind of have that look, and I don't have that look at all. And so there was that. And then I also think just who I am is so different than not only my siblings, but everybody else in the family. I've always been the odd one out. And I just thought, well, I'm just different. There can always be an odd person in the family.
Right.
And that's just me. And so I think that, and I would say that, as a kid, you don't necessarily question these things, but my parents were really overprotective. My mother, oh my gosh. And when I think about the story my sister told me, because she did tell me what had happened, which was that my adoptive mother, I grew up in Southern California, and one day she went to visit a friend, and she was knocking on the door, and outside, in the yard, she could hear a lady crying. And when her friend opened the door, she said, hey, who's this woman out here? Do you know her? And she said, yeah, it's my cousin. She's here from Chicago. She's not married. She's pregnant and she's got 2 kids already. She's got another one on the way and she wants me to help her get an abortion. And I'm not going to help her no matter how much she cries. And my mother took this stranger with her family to live with them. And my parents were not well off. They did not have, they already had children. And they basically told this woman, first they did offer her to give her, not that they could, they didn't have much money, but they offered to help her financially and she didn't want it. And so they said, well, we'll adopt your child then and we'll raise her. And they gave her some money to go back on the bus back to Chicago. And so then my mother took my siblings and, around my crib and she said to them, this is your new sister. She's adopted and you're never to tell her she's adopted because people will try to hurt her. It was the 60s, year 1961. And there was a stigma around adoption and they did not want that to follow me around because they were from Mexico. They were immigrants and it was even worse in Mexico. And they had seen how children were treated. So it became this very protective thing. And I was like, God, I wish people wouldn't hover over me so much. So I would say those little things, are things like I remember asking my mother one time too about my birth and she couldn't give me any information on it.
Which, to us who grew up knowing, we often, one of the things we miss is the fact that we sort of spring out of nowhere, like a Cabbage Patch Kid, and there's no birth story. I can tell my kids, well, my water broke at this time or whatever, and that becomes a part of your lore, the beginning of you, the advent, if you will. That would be so interesting. Your siblings, I don't know how many you have, but they would all have had that advent story and you didn't have it.
You're making me think that another clue why I should not be a private detective. Yeah, because now I'm thinking he had a story, she had a story. And, I'm the only one without a story.
Are you the youngest?
I am by 9 years.
Okay.
So everybody, and the thing is in my family, when you're asking, how could it have kept secret? My parents just had that power. They were the matriarch and the patriarch of a very large family that covered a lot of California and Mexico. And in fact, a funny story is that one of my cousins came to visit me in Santa Fe and he was sharing what he knew because suddenly it was out of the bag. So everybody could share everything that they knew. And so he was telling me, and I had sort of made a joke after a while of finding out that all my cousins knew. I started joking every time I pick up the phone. I go, okay, you didn't tell me. I am going to kick your ass. And they were all laughing. But then when he got here, I said, you know what, Jesse, you know what? I'm going to kick your ass. And he goes, well, I'd rather you try to kick my ass than my aunt try to kick my ass, which is my mother, right? And so, there was this kind of unspoken power my parents had with just a look. Everybody knew, and everybody knew they weren't supposed to say anything.
Interesting. When you found out the it's dropped on you, right? This little bomb goes off in your lap. I think I would just have heard like the rushing of wind in my ears or something. Like I just can't imagine processing anything because of that. What was it like for you?
Well, it's interesting you brought up auditory because I realize now looking back at the time, I was just, I think, in shock and I didn't realize I was in shock. And I know now that I was because something physical happened to me when my sister first said, CARLYN, you're adopted. And I remember my hearing just changed a little bit. And then when she said, and basically your mother was going to get an abortion, I mean, I was just sort of like, then my hearing completely stopped. Now, I just want to clarify that I am all for women's rights, whatever, for reproductory rights.
Sure.
So it wasn't that. It was just the thought that, whoa, in a second, I realized I had had this very full life to this point. And suddenly I realized I had just been on the edge of not having a life at all. And so it was almost in that moment that it felt like cotton balls were stuck in my ears because I was suddenly struggling to hear her. And I remember just kind of frowning and looking at her as if I was trying to read her lips because I stopped being able to fully hear her. And I think that was just shock of something happened physically to me. And so, yeah, I would say the first thing is it must have been overwhelmed. Of course, I was sitting there going, oh yeah, I'm okay. I'm okay. Amazing. Yeah, my world was just turned upside down.
Oh, for sure. So it was your sister that you matched with on Ancestry. So after you were told you were adopted by the sister you grew up with, do you have any type of relationship with your half sister?
I do. This is the thing that happened. It seemed that as soon as the information came out, it was like the floodgates opened and suddenly thing after thing after thing happened. And and I wanted to ride the tide because I was like, I have an urgent need to figure out what my identity is now. It's like, I cannot stop until I know the truth, all the truth. And so I probably acted much faster than I should have. I should have probably taken a breath, but I also felt like, okay, this woman has been looking for family. I remember she said to me, she has a family now and she has grandchildren. And she said, I just want to know who they look like. I just look at them and I wonder who they look like. And so therefore here I was like, God, I'm not ready to talk to her, but I can't let her wait another minute looking for family all these years, knowing that's me. And maybe I'm not ready, but I decided to sacrifice however I felt to call her and let her know, hey, this is what I discovered. And she was overjoyed. I mean, I was almost, but again, it's an interesting thing. The people who are looking for family and the people who are not, like, I'm just sort of moving one step at a time towards this. And she was like, yes, I have family and this is great. And so, we did talk at one point much later on. And I said, I have to take this one step at a time. I can't just launch into a new family. I have to do it organically, however long it takes, however short it takes, whatever that is. And she was very, very obliging. She's like, of course, yes. And so we probably connect once a month. We text, and certainly on certain holidays and birthdays, we also connect.
Okay.
And
oh, go. I was just going to say, so she was raised with your birth mother, right?
Yes.
So was she able to? Did she know about you before matching? Okay, so your birth mother never.
Well, this is the thing. She was so young. She was so young. So she would have been, 7, 9. My sister would have been 9. So she was 7. Okay. And so she was living with her and her and my half brother who actually died, but they were living with my adoptive family. And it was as if she didn't remember any of it until the floodgates opened. I said, this is what happened, blah, blah, blah. And suddenly she started remembering everything. And you would think maybe she was making it up, except she said things that she had to have been there to know. I mean, about where it was, about my sister catching, lizards, my sister having chihuahuas. She said, oh, I remember your sister. I remember your mother. It was like amazing what she started to remember. And she said she didn't remember a baby. She didn't remember that part of it. And it's probably because they had my birth mother in a separate kind of, not a room, but like a separate, I don't know, guest house or something back. And so where she was. And I remember she said, I always knew there was something missing and now I know it was you.
Oh,
wow.
Incredible.
Wow. So, and there was a brother.
There was.
Sister brother, who was the older?
Martha was so he was, I think 3 years older than me, or 4 years older than me, something like that. No, I'm bad at math. I can't remember.
That's okay. Oh, so am I. Oh, yes.
Yes.
But you never got to meet your brother?
Nope. And this is why I'm telling you, stuff started just to happen on another, I don't know, within the cosmos, because so I connected with my half sister, and out of all the times in my, that this could have happened, suddenly about 2 weeks after she and I connect on the phone, she calls me and says, I don't know what's happening in the universe because an attorney just contacted me and they had lost touch.
Mhm.
And she said he died, but they're looking for his next of kin. And that's her. And I had said to her before this, do you think our birth mother is still alive? And she said, no, she couldn't possibly be. She would be in her mid-90s. And the thing I haven't told you is that my birth mother was mentally ill. She was severely bipolar. I mean, just to the point that, Martha, I think, would try to have her come live with her, and she would just leave and not want, I don't even know how she survived because she ended up in really shabby hotels in Chicago or motels or whatever they were. And so I said, wow. The attorney, what he found out was my birth mother is still alive.
Oh, wow.
In a state hospital in Chicago on hospice.
Wow.
So I said to her, are you going to go see her? Because she hadn't seen her in 20 years. And she said, yeah, do you want to come? So 3 days later, 2 weeks and 3 days later, after finding out I'm adopted, I'm headed on a plane to Chicago to meet my birth mother. So,
wow.
Yes.
That whirlwind is crazy. For those of us who grew up knowing, we always had the question. And some people have been, they'll be honest and say they were more or less curious than others. And that's all fair. We're all different, right? With different personalities and different homes we found ourselves in. But we did all, maybe think of it from time to time. You found out, and in 2 weeks, you were like in reunion and meeting people. And did you crash at any point?
Yes, that's a very good. I was just thinking about that because even telling you this, I'm thinking this is just too fast. It's just too fast.
It is so fast.
It is so fast. So this is after I had discovered a lot, but I had gone to, I forget what happened. Oh, yes. We went away for a little while for a few weeks to Europe. I was doing a talk there. That's what it was. When I got back, and this was just right I was still stressed. I was still feeling just the pressure of it all, of the magnitude maybe.
Mm-hmm.
I got home and I got the sickest I have ever been in my adult life. I was in urgent care 3 times saying, what's wrong with me? I mean, I'm getting sicker. What's wrong? I couldn't even crawl out of bed. And I believe that had a lot to do with how stressed I was about everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you ever read anything by Gabor Mate? He's a Canadian physician, but he talks about trauma a lot. And he has a book. It's right behind me. I had to check. It's called The Myth of Normal. But he talks about how that stresses and traumas sit in our bodies, right? Mm-hmm. And for my part, I struggled with chronic pain for much of my adult life. Mm-hmm. I'm now estranged from my adopting parents for reasons. And, the moment that happened, when I put up the boundary, my pain went away, and it hasn't been back. But here you are finding this out. It's an opposite effect.
Well, I was an acupuncturist for about nearly 20 years in the Bay Area. And so I was very, very aware of the mind-body connection and very aware not only from treating clients, but my own situations where I would not process certain emotions and they ended up in my body somewhere. And then they would come out 10 years later and I'd have pain, something would happen. And the whole time this was happening, or as much as I could, I wanted to be I knew how traumatic this was. I don't think I knew it was trauma at the time, but I knew how big this felt. Mm-hmm. And I very much did not want to store any emotion. I mean, I wanted to process whatever I was feeling. I was okay to feel it. It didn't feel good, but I knew how important it was to process it. And I also I had this faith that in the end, if I could get to whatever the end run is, or whatever felt like I had moved past this to some degree. I knew that there would be some sort of wisdom or learning or something I would get at the end of this little road. Therefore, I was very conscious, or I tried to be as mindful as possible throughout the journey. And even when I got really sick, I thought I tried to just be as mindful as possible, going, okay, what is this, what's going on, and not to hold on to it. And for me to try to heal as naturally as I possibly could. And at the end of that, when I was able to get up on my 2 feet again and go somewhere, I did find a therapist who I worked with, because I said, I do not want to have any residual negativity or whatever it is that I'm not looking at. I need you to be a mirror and say, hey, maybe you're not looking at this, or maybe we need to talk about this. So yeah.
That's incredible. One of the things that you did say about when you were told you're adopted, one of your things you said was, now I need to find out who I am. Like, who am I, right? So I find that so fascinating, because well, for me, I was adopted, and I feel like I was raised in a good family. I knew I was adopted. And then I got to this point where I was like, I need to figure out where I come from. So I did the whole reunion thing. It was amazing. I was like, this is perfect. I have this family and this family. We're going to bring them all together. And then going, who am I? Like, here's my adopted family that, kind of like you, I didn't mirror them. So I kind of felt different, whatever, loved. Then I have my biological family that are welcoming, but I don't have any history with them. So it's like you're on this little in-between space. So it was I'm still trying to figure out who I am. So I just found that so fascinating, because all your life, for 57 years, right? You were like, I know exactly who I am, pretty much. And then this hit you. And that was one of the things you thought about, so have you figured this out? I know in one of your write-ups on your book, it says that you have worked through forgiveness. And I'm just kind of amazed in the 4 short years. It sounds like you processed it all great, but like, I'm very impressed that you can do that. I've been in reunion for 5 years, and I'm still like all over the place trying to figure this out.
Well, I always say this because this experience has, I used to look at life black and white.
Okay.
And then over time, I've gone more into the gray. This has really pushed me into the gray. And as I was trying to make sense of things, you try to put it into a box, or this is what this is. And I realized there is nothing like that. I've got to just be completely free and just let it be gray. And why I say this is because I feel I had a right to know. I feel I should have been told as a child. Having said that, I think of the parents who adopted me. They weren't exactly warm and fuzzy, especially my mother. So she probably would have said something to the effect of, Carlyn, you're adopted. Let's never speak of it again. And that would not have helped. So then I think, okay, I moved into my, into my adult life. And I was pretty angry at that time. I had such a fraught relationship with my adoptive mother, and it kind of went into my adulthood. And I think to myself, well, if they had told me then, I would have been in sayonara or something, because I would have been so angry at them. And then I think in my 30s, well, I had a marriage that didn't go very well. Not a great time to tell me. In my 40s, I had I have the marriage I have now, which is beautiful and wonderful, but we had to have 2 stepkids, and it was a lot of work, and I just was overwhelmed. Not a good time. So I think about my 50s. I hit my 50s, and I've been really in my stride. I remember that day that my sister told me I had just come back from talking to senators at our legislature here in Santa Fe about animal rights, because I'm an animal rights advocate. And I was thinking to myself the whole drive home, wow, I feel good. I feel strong. I feel the best I've ever felt. I get home. My sister says, you're adopted. I'm like, whoa, it's just kind of like it hits you. And I think to myself, wow, I think of, yes, I should have been told at an early age, but sometimes I think this was the very best time, because it was the time I could actually deal with it. Like, I feel like one of those trees that bends but doesn't break.
Yes.
And so that's how I felt. And of course, I've forgotten what your question was initially.
I'm just impressed on how you worked through forgiveness.
Forgiveness.
Well,
To be honest, and I do understand that a lot of adoptees and late discovery adoptees do not understand this. I personally don't understand it totally either. But when I heard the words, CARLYN, you're adopted, and then my sister started to read to me what my adoptive mother had done, and I thought to myself, the adoptive mother who she and I were locking horns so much, and which did not mean I didn't love her. I did love her, but we were just, it was warfare. And I thought, oh my God, she saved me. The person, I mean, I knew she was a mother bear, but wow. And I think I have spoken with Martha at length, and to be totally frank, I would not have wanted that life. I mean, I keep thinking that I would have been the youngest of a woman who was mentally ill. I mean, she was really mentally ill. And I think to myself, I have had a great life. I mean, my mother and I definitely fought, and I was always like going, God, I can't wait to get out of here. I can't wait to get out of here. But I've had a great life, and so therefore I didn't feel angry at my parents, because that's who they were. It's not like they acted out of character. My parents were secret keepers. They were who they were. And so I didn't feel angry at them. Who I did feel disappointed in was my siblings.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, because I thought, I would have told you, and this is how we all differ. I would have
Right.
told you.
Right.
Yeah.
And to this day, I don't necessarily know that they totally understand, because I feel that they feel that they did what my parents asked of them.
Mm-hmm.
They kept the secret to protect me, and they were always very protective. Even now, my sister is very protective of me. So it's not as though I had to really work on forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
It came sort of naturally with my parents, who the other person I will say I did feel kind of angry towards was my birth mother, and that she was mentally ill. So we have to give her that, but she did not treat the two children she had in remotely a loving way that I would have thought would have been nurturing and kind to children. So that kind of pissed me off.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I find that we often are expected by the greater culture to be thankful, to be grateful for being saved. You clearly came from a situation where your parents, your adopting parents, were not looking either to flesh out their family with, they had all boys and they really wanted a girl, or, that sort of thing that happened back in the baby scoop era, or for infertility reasons, adopted, because you talked about how, maybe they should have told you or what have you. Well, I can tell you right now, at least in baby scoop era, even if you knew, no one talked about it. No, it is not, even if you were told, even if you had other siblings who were also adopted, and now that's it. No one talks about it. And that, sits in you and grows with you. And I can see, though, your sister that you have met now, biological half sister, how nice it would have been, even if you needed, and you did, because of your birth mother's mental health, needed external care, how nice it would have been for you and your sister and brother to know each other. Because I have often felt like that. I have found a brother on one side and a sister on the other, and how nice, even if I did need external care, that I could have known my siblings. Did you have to grieve that at all? The idea that you didn't get to know these people growing up?
I wouldn't say that I felt grief around that. I'll say that I do, since my half brother had died, we spoke to somebody at his work, and asking him questions, them sending me some information. I thought to myself, gosh, we have a lot in common. I would have liked to have known him.
Yeah.
But because I didn't know him, I don't feel grief. I don't feel grief. And to be frank, I'm glad to be knowing my half sister now. but I think because I was so close with my adoptive siblings, we were so close. Like, to me, they were parts of my body. They were parts, we just got each other. We understood each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I would say that it was hard to think, whoa, I have another sister. Now we're going to add to this balance. So I wouldn't say, I think grief is too strong of a word for me. And maybe that makes me kind of freakish.
No, I think it's just different.
Yes.
Because so often those of us, at least it seems like many of us who grew up knowing and then were in reunion afterward, there is a grieving process of not having known certain people or being able to know who your roots came from. Or so I'm in Canada, and I found out only a few years ago that my kids actually, when I did the 23andMe, each of them in their own way said, "Oh, I've been waiting forever for you to find something out." Because that pebble in the pond, it ripples out. So when they were in school having to do family tree assignments, they could fill out dad's side and it was a truthful tree.
Mm-hmm.
And my side, they were very aware that I didn't come from that. And I don't know how it is in the States, but our family tree assignments now have to do with immigration, because they're looking at the fact that there are First Nations people who are from here. So family tree assignments generally are, where did your family come from? And they were very aware that they didn't come from my adopting family.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just think it's different for when you actually felt you were totally connected and had that connection and felt like you were a part of that family. I don't think it's freakish. I think it's interesting and just another perspective.
Where I did feel loss, I mean, I definitely felt loss and I definitely felt grief, but it was more when I suddenly realized, like, it felt like my connection to my adoptive family was severed. That's what it felt like. And suddenly I felt a little bit like one of those baby deer that are being born and they're trying to stand and they're just spindly legs. And all sorts of ridiculous thoughts were going through my head. Like, suddenly I thought, oh, does this mean that now my adoptive family is saying, go be with your real family? That it's like ludicrous, but that's what went on in my head, that I felt that kind of disconnect, like, oh, am I going to have to spend Christmas and Thanksgiving with people I don't know? You know, and I'd be like, that's insane. Of course not. And so that's where I felt that severing of the bond that I had grown up with. The thing is that over time, that severing actually it transformed into suddenly realizing that my family, it was almost as though I had now a freedom to choose my family, because I suddenly thought, well, I'm different. I understand now why I'm different. I am here. I'm in my own. I felt more powerful after time went on, and I felt empowered to choose my own family. And in that family, I chose definitely my adoptive family because I love them. And no matter what they do, I think no matter what, if they didn't tell me, I feel they made a mistake, and I'm willing to, to let that go. That's just how it is. And I still love them and I want to be part of that family. I also include there now my half sister. And she's part of that family. And it made me really stop to think, well, who else is part of that family? And I have really great friends. I have really great friends that are family. And as somebody who cares about animals, the animals who I share my home with are part of my family too, and all the ones who aren't here anymore. So I realized that my family grew with this experience, and it had nothing to do with blood.
Right.
That's so well said. So well said. And I'm really happy for you that you can put all those puzzle pieces together and make it work. It's just beautiful that you can. But we do, we all have those friends, right, that are just as close to us as family. So that's awesome.
Thank you. And thanks for letting me share this, because I realized after speaking with so many people, we all have very differing stories and different ways we react to it. And I feel that the more I speak with people, other people who have had these stories, I'll garner some piece of information. Even from this podcast, I'll take something away with me, and it'll be on my mind for a while, and I'll process it, and it'll add to just my reforming of my identity.
Yes.
It's ongoing, right? To me, it doesn't end.
Exactly. And that's why I love these platforms of podcasts where we can have adoptees from all different areas, stages, backgrounds, because every time I speak to someone or listen to another podcast, I learn something, I connect with something. And a lot of it just does bring peace to myself so that I don't feel alone, and that I know that some of the struggles that I've been having, it's not a crazy thing, right? Like, it's a normal thing for the situation that we've been put in. So it's awesome that you're here to share with us.
Thank you.
I think about that author physician I just mentioned again, Gabor Mate, where he talks about we have normal reactions to abnormal situations. So when we as adoptees are made to feel ungrateful, like you should be grateful for being saved, or you, like, if you're looking for your roots, then that's a betrayal of your adopting parents, or all of these different things that are thrown at us, which is why we have for so long not spoken. Because why would you speak if immediately people throw out at you just how you should actually react? You know, they assume they should know how you should react. And these conversations, to me, are validating of all of those normal reactions to an abnormal situation. It is not normal for a mother to relinquish a child. Does sometimes it have to happen? Yes. Is there sometimes mental illness, like in your situation, where it really actually probably was the best thing for you in terms of safety and all that? Yes, absolutely. And yet there seems to be this prescribed, all adoptees should react this way for everyone's feelings and thoughts, right? And the general public. And yet these conversations, to me, just show, no, it's all normal. It's not black and white. It is both and. It's all of it. And it's all valid and all okay. And that is what I have so enjoyed about these conversations as well. Now, getting to your pets, you have a dog now. So I have a dog, Angus. And he's an old man. He's sitting outside on the porch right now. And I know Amy does as well. What did you have Grace, the dog, when you found out you were adopted?
No, and that is part of the story. About 10 months later, and 10 months, late discovery adoptees, they may think that's a long time. For me, it was nothing. It was a snap of a finger. It's 10 months. But 10 months later, and this was after I'd gotten sick, after I'd gone to therapy. At the end of that, I remember looking at my husband, because at the start of the story, my 2 dogs had just died. I had 2 older dogs, and they literally had just died when I got this information. And I always adopt animals. That's what I do. But I didn't during this time. It was just too insane and too many things happening. 10 months later, there was a really bad hoarding situation here in New Mexico, and a lot of a woman was thrown in jail, and all the dogs were, they were trying to find somebody to adopt the dogs. And I went out there, and this dog chose me, and she had been attacked by a mountain lion, so she still has the scars on her back from that. Also, those dogs were so traumatized, and Grace this is the dog I adopted. She was quite traumatized. She was scared. It was almost as if she had lost her identity too, because she forgot how to be a dog. She didn't wag her tail. She didn't sniff anything. She just lay in her crate. She seemed depressed. She wouldn't eat. And I knew that I was going to have to devote all of my time to help her rehab in order for her to get better. So for the next 6 months, we walked, we hiked. I let her take her time doing everything. And over time, I started noticing she got better. She got better, and her tail started to wag. She was eating. She was definitely trusting me. And 6 months, literally, it was about 6 months mark where I suddenly looked at her, my husband and I, and said, she's a completely different dog. And everybody at the dog park was saying the same thing. Wow, look at her. She's amazing. And at that point, I realized, yeah, I'm different too. And I think part of that was that I had, instead of having that story of mine, you're adopted, you just found out 24/7, I put all my attention to helping her and gave my brain a break from it all. And I realized when I came out of it, like, oh, I'm better too. I'm better too. So that was kind of an amazing connection of, animals can give us a lot of health and, benefits just normally every single day, from relieving our stress to benefiting our, cardiovascular disease, to helping us smile more and be happier in many ways. But, when you do something like that and you help them, it's like they give it all back to you 1,000-fold. So she's my companion. She's amazing. And I believe that she really helped me get better, or at least get to a better place.
I think
That's
you both
amazing.
helped each other, right? I mean, that's amazing. It is. It's incredible, but animals are amazing. I love looking at your books that you wrote before this one, and I'm definitely going to have to get it. But I know my dog, I have two though now. The dogs, they definitely bring you just unconditional love, and they just bring me happiness. They make you smile every time you see them, even if they're being a little bit troublesome at times. You just have to laugh, because they just love you no matter what. So
they do. And unconditional love is a hard thing to find, and they do it really well.
Yes, they definitely
really
do. I was going to ask, I know the three books prior to this one obviously are a little bit different. So what inspired you to write your story, Junkyard Girl?
As a writer, I don't know that I had any other choice.
Okay.
As somebody who writes, that's the way I make sense of the world.
Okay.
That is my way. I think some people maybe are, they draw, they paint, or they're artistic, through their music. But for me, it's writing. And as urgently as I felt that first year that I had to find out everything I need to know to rebuild my foundation, because everything since, when our identity is formed, everything comes after that is built on that.
Yes.
And so I needed to put the pieces of those puzzles back together again. And after that, I remember sitting back and going, okay, it's time. What is this about? What is this story? And therefore, and I've learned this very well now, how helpful it was for me to write that story down. Not only was it helpful for me to engage in conversations with people who listened, but now to put it down in words was so helpful for my healing process. So I think it was self-serving in that way.
Okay. That's wonderful. I'm waiting to read it myself. I was saying I wanted to download it on my Kindle, but I've been finding that all the adoptee memoirs I want to have in my hand so I can make notes, put stickies, highlight, just because there's so much information, I think, that just touches me. So waiting for it in hand.
Well, I look forward to hearing from both of you when you finish, because I'd love to know what you think.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I am curious. You found a half sister on one side. And when you said that you did the ancestry, and that was just like most people do it in order to see what else fleshes out their story of being in their biological family, which of course you found out it wasn't your biological family. Do you have a similar ethnic background to your adoptive family? And do you have any hints toward who your biological father is?
It's definitely the same, what I would have perceived as the same ethnic background. because I remember at the time looking at it going, oh, there's nothing interesting here. It's like, I know this. And that's why I pretty much, that's the other thing, I set it aside because I just skimmed it.
It didn't say like Scottish or something, which made you go like, what?
Oh yeah, that would have been so cool. But actually what did begin part of this too was that my adoptive mother had always said we had a Jewish bloodline running through our family. And I was always curious about that because growing up Catholic, I always heard that the Jews were the chosen people. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to be one of the chosen people. And whereas all my cousins were coming in at 40% Jewish, I came in at 3% Jewish. Again, didn't pick up on the big clue there. So yeah. And in regards to my birth father, nobody knows who that is. I suspect, just from what I've put together from a biological aunt that I met, who was my birth mother's sister, that it was probably just kind of a one-night stand. It was not important kind of thing. And nothing has come up on Ancestry DNA. So I began to think about that because people have asked me, well, don't you want to find out who that is? And I think that first year was so traumatizing. It was a little PTSD inducing that I kind of joke with my family. I can only meet one new relative a year. That's all I can handle. But
yeah,
but I finally have gotten to a point whereas I needed to know the entire truth. I now sort of feel as though it's hard to imagine anybody other than the father who raised me to be my true father. Mm-hmm. I really, that man was just such a presence and such a part of me that I'm definitely okay not knowing who that mystery man is, who was my birth father. I don't know that he necessarily would add anything to my story. Mm-hmm. And yet the adoptive father I had really has.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair.
Yeah. We are getting close to the end, CARLYN. So is there anything that we haven't covered with you that you would like to share?
Well, if my adoptive father, my birth father is out there.
There you go.
Or if anybody else thinks they're related to me, please let me know. No, I just want to encourage. I know I've been on many groups and I know there's a lot of pain out there with our group of people, the big NPE umbrella of people. And I just really want to encourage that maybe not everybody will understand what we're going through, but if you can find others who you can share your story with, at least for me, it was so healing to tell my story. I must have told it 100 times to friends and, oh, you're a new friend here. You haven't heard this yet. But to be able to tell it over and over, it's almost like it was a way to just get it out and to process it. And I know some people who have never told their story. Mm-hmm. And therefore, I just find that, at least for me, that was extremely helpful. For me, writing it was extremely helpful. And I know we all have our creative outlets, and it doesn't have to be something artistic, but maybe there is a way creatively that works for you. But I would just hope that you don't hold on too tightly.
That is so well said. Mm-hmm. Well, we are so glad that you spent time with us today to tell us your story and to share your book. And I really look forward to diving in. And I really am so thrilled that you joined us, and your story is going to help so many other people, know that they're not alone. And even at 57, learning something like that, you are amazing and an incredible person. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. It's been absolutely my delight to be with both of you.